Hello everyone. In our last session of rapid revision, we discuss the various sections of Chartered Accountant Act 1949 and start the Schedule 1 of Chartered Accountant Act 1949. Schedule 1, it is divided in 4 parts. Part 1 deals with professional misconduct for a practicing member. Part 2 deals with the professional misconduct for a member in service. Part 3 that again deal with professional misconduct but for members generally. And the part number 4 that deals with the other misconduct for members generally. In the last session, we cover clause number 1 to clause number 5 of part 1 of first schedule. So now we start with the clause number 6 of part 1 of first schedule, and we will try to cover the first schedule, part 1, part 2, part 3 as well as part 4 in this session. So we start with the clause number 6. Clause number 6, it is in relation to solicitations. Clause 6 provides that a practicing member is not permitted to solicit client or professional work either directly or indirectly by any circular, by advertisement, by personal communication or by interview or any other means. However, there are certain permitted forms of solicitation either in the form of guidelines or in the form of public interviews or other aspects. So, in clause number 6, there are various guidelines in a relation to development of website, in a relation to permitted forms of solicitation, as well as guidelines in a relation to responding to tenders. Clause 6, it says that a CA in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he solicits the client's or professional work directly or indirectly by any circular, advertisement, personal communication, interview or other means. These are the various ways through which the clients may be solicited or professional work may be solicited, but in general clause 6 prohibits solicitation. However, there are various permitted forms of solicitation, and first one among them is you can secure professional work from another member in practice. First one. Second one, in relation to response to tenders, Council of ICAI issued guidelines, and according to that guidelines, the various areas are divided in two categories. Category 1 exclusive area, category 2 non-exclusive area. In relation to the tenders which belongs to non-exclusive area, there is no restriction. A practicing member can respond to tenders without any condition. However, if the tender belongs to an exclusive area, then a practicing member can respond to that tender only when the minimum fees prescribed in the tender. When the minimum fees prescribed in the tender, then the practicing member can respond to that tender. However, if minimum fees not prescribed in tender, then member cannot respond to that tender. But if any member or a firm of chartered accountant respond to tenders that belongs to exclusive area in which minimum fees is not prescribed, in that case it will be considered as a solicitation, and the concerned member or the firm of chartered accountant will be deemed guilty of professional misconduct under clause 6 part 1 of first schedule. And at the same time, if in any tender there exists any demand for deposit of earnest money, then guidelines allows it. That means a practicing member can deposit the earnest money if asked in the tender. So earnest money deposit if asked in tenders can be deposited. Now there are various guidelines which are issued under clause 6, and these guidelines are in relation to development of website, in relation to permitted forms of solicitation. In these class notes, only the key points, we can say the main points of these guidelines are covered, and for further detail you may cover from the main book. Council guidelines for solicitation. The first one, empanelment for allotment of work or allotment of audit or professional work. There are certain organizations which maintains a panel, and any practicing member can apply, can make a request to get their name entered in that list. However, to make roving inquiries so as to determine whether a panel exists, it is not permitted. And if any query is being raised by the organization that maintains such panel about any fees, then the practicing member is permitted to reply about his fees. In respect of organization where a panel of chartered accountant exists, a member is free to request to place his name on the panel. However, making roving inquiries to determine the existence of such panel, it is not permitted. And if any inquiry is raised as to the fees for a particular activity, then the member in practice is entitled, or we can say that member in practice is permissible. He can reply to that inquiry. However, in response to that inquiry, giving a menu of or giving the entire scale of fees for various kind of the activities, that is not permitted at all. You can mention, you can specify, you can reply only about the fees for which the inquiry is being raised by that organization. Second one is a very important point, and that is in a relation to section 140 subsection 4 of the Companies Act 2013. As far as section 140 subsection 4 of the Companies Act 2013 is concerned, in a relation to a retiring auditor who has a right of reappointment, but if any member of the company who is entitled to give special notice to the company can give special notice. If any such special notice is received by the company from the members of the company that a retiring auditor should not be reappointed, or in place of the retiring auditor someone else needs to be appointed, then a copy of the special notice need to be given by the company to that retiring auditor. And in return, the retiring auditor is entitled to submit a representation of reasonable length. And the purpose of the representation is not to defame the company, just to secure needless publicity. In the representation, a member is entitled to mention about his working, that how he performs his work in compliance with the professional standards, and his willingness, that he is willing to continue if the member allows him. But any defamatory matter, just to secure needless publicity, it will be considered as a solicitation under clause 6 of part 1 of the schedule 1. Representation should not be used to secure needless publicity and soliciting for his continuance as an auditor. Representation may be set out in a dignified manner, that how he has been acting independently through his term of office and his willingness to continue as an auditor. Now the third one point about the public interviews, whether a practicing member can appear for the public interviews, there is no prohibition or restriction. However, there is a condition that these public interviews should not result in any kind of needless publicity. So public interviews are permitted subject to the condition that it should not result in any publicity. Now, guidelines for posting the particulars on website. We studied earlier that a practicing member is not permitted to solicit the client by any means, and any means, that means any means may cover website or any other activities. The main focus is on the website, and there are various points in relation to these guidelines. The key point of such guidelines are: number one, no standard format is prescribed. That means website can be designed in any format. No restriction on use of color. Any color may be used in designing of that website. Website should run on pull model. Push model of technology is not permitted. Mention on website address on professional stationery, it is permitted. Members are allowed to use logo and only the logo as prescribed by the ICAI and this one. No other logo is permitted. Photographs of any sort not permitted. However, passport size photograph of the members, it is permitted. Details on the website should be so designed that it does not amount to soliciting the client or advertisement of professional attainments or services. Website may provide a link to the website of ICAI, its regional council, branches, and also to the website of government department, regulatory authorities only, not about the other websites. Address of the website may be different from the name of the firm. It is not mandatory that the address should match with the name of the firm or the name of the proprietor. Name of the clients and fees charged, a very important point, is not permitted to be given on the website except when required by any regulator. If under any regulation or legal provision there is a requirement that on the website a member of the ICAI is required to mention the name of the client or the fees charged from them, then such details needs to be given on the website along with the relevant regulation number and the name of the regulator. Otherwise, client's name and the fees charged from them should not be mentioned on the website. These are the main points in relation to clause number 6. Now, moving to clause number 7. Clause number 7, it puts restrictions on the advertisements. Advertisement of professional attainments, advertisement of services, or uses any designation other than that of the chartered accountant. A CA in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he advertises his professional attainments or services, and second point, if he uses any designation or description other than that of the chartered accountant on professional documents, letterhead, visiting cards, etc. However, mentioning the recognized memberships and the qualifications on the professional stationery, it is permitted. Like if a person mention his qualifications like BCom, MCom, MBA, no issue. Membership of ICAI or other recognized institution like associate member of Institute of Company Secretaries of India, etc. Such memberships and the recognized qualifications can be used on the professional document. There is no restriction on this. And besides this, clause 7 also provides details in relation to the permitted forms of the advertisement. The main guidelines are: number 1, words like income tax consultant, cost consultant, or management consultant not allowed. Means any designation other than that of chartered accountant, wrong spelling, chartered accountant. Second one, persons. एक second, just wait. So, first point, words like income tax consultant, cost consultant, management consultant not allowed. Second point, persons eligible otherwise, subject to the permission, may practice as advocate, but simultaneous use of designation chartered accountant and advocate on the professional document, it is not permitted. Next one, a member may appear on TV and films, etc., and describes themselves as chartered accountant but mentioning the name, address and service of the firm is not allowed. But no reference as to the name, address and the service of the firm should be made. Next one, name of CA acting as the director in the company is permissible to appear in the prospectus issued by the company. However, descriptions regarding his expertise and knowledge in that prospectus is not permitted. These are the main guidelines which are issued under clause number 7. Now, moving to clause number 8. Clause 8, it requires that a practicing CA who has been appointed as auditor by a company or any entity is required to communicate with the predecessor auditor before accepting the appointment as an auditor. So, clause 8 requires that a practicing CA should communicate with the predecessor auditor. However, a CA shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he accepts a position as auditor previously held by another CA or certified auditor and without first communicating with him in writing. That means, if any audit is being offered to any practicing member, then he is required to first communicate with the predecessor auditor in writing before accepting the audit. Detailed explanation you may cover from the book. In the class notes, I incorporate only the main points. First point, professional reasons why this prior communication is required. There are various reasons due to which we are required to communicate with the predecessor auditor. And the main reasons, number 1, to ensure compliance of section 139 and 140 of the Companies Act. To ensure that undisputed audit fees of the predecessor auditor has been paid. To determine whether the predecessor auditor has been removed only due to the reason that he had issued a qualified audit report. So, in first two cases, if the predecessor auditor informs us that he has been removed without compliance of section 139 and 140 or undisputed audit fees of the predecessor auditor has not been paid by the company, in these two cases, incoming auditor should not accept the audit. If he accepts the audit, then he will be held guilty of professional misconduct under respective clauses. Not under clause 8, under the respective clause. For this, clause 9 of part 1 of first schedule will be attracted. In second case, clause 1, part number 2 of second schedule will be attracted. Clause 8 only requires that incoming auditor is required to communicate with the predecessor auditor in writing. Anything which is after the communication is not being dealt by the clause number 8. In first two cases, acceptance of audit amounts to professional misconduct under these clauses, not under clause number 8. In third case, member may accept audit if he thinks that attitude of retiring auditor was not proper and justified. Mode of communication. Communication should be either by registered post acknowledgement due or by hand against an acknowledgement in writing. Mere certificate of post under certificate of posting UPC is not sufficient to establish the communication. Applicability, the most important point. The requirement for communicating would apply to all types of audit, whether it is a case of statutory audit, tax audit, internal audit, concurrent audit or other kind of audit. And remember, this requirement apply in case of replacement positions. Not in case of parallel positions. Like company audit, internal audit, whether the internal auditor is required to communicate to company auditor or company auditor is required to communicate to internal auditor. No, these are the parallel positions. Clause 9. Clause 9. It mentions that if a practicing CA accepts appointment as an auditor of a company, this clause will apply only in relation to a company, without first ensuring compliance of section 139 and 140 of Companies Act 2013. So, a practicing CA shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he accept an appointment as auditor of a company without first ascertaining the compliance of section 139, 140. Read with section 141 of the Companies Act 2013. Section 139 deals with the appointment, reappointment of an auditor. 140 deals with the resignation, removal, special notice, and section 141 deals with the eligibility, qualification, and disqualification of company auditor. Now, clause number 10. Clause 10. It says that if a practicing CA charges his fees for the professional work based on a percentage or fees that is based on or the fees that is contingent upon findings, then he will be guilty of professional misconduct. However, Regulation 192 provides some cases whereby a practicing CA can charge his fees on a percentage basis. A practicing CA shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he charges or offers to charge, accept or offers to accept in respect of professional work the fees which is based on percentage of profit or fees which is contingent upon findings or results of such engagement. The fees is required to be fixed in lump sum in advance, means at the time of entering into the engagement the fees needs to be fixed. However, there are various permitted ways. Regulation 192 provides that if a practicing CA is acting as a receiver or liquidator, he may charge his fees on a percentage of realization or disbursement of assets. If a person is working as an auditor of a cooperative society, he may charge the fees as a percentage of paid up capital or working capital or gross or net income or profits. In case a practicing CA is working as a valuer for the purpose of determining the taxes, duties under the direct tax laws or indirect tax laws, okay, in that case the fees may be based on the percentage of property valued. In case of management consultancy services, the fees may be also be fixed on a percentage basis that may be contingent upon the findings or the results of such work. In case of fundraising services, fees may be charged on a percentage of fundraise. In case of debt recovery services, the fees may be charged on the percentage of debt recovered. In case of services related to cost optimization, the fees may be charged as a percentage of the benefit derived. So, Regulation 192 mentions those cases in which a practicing CA can charge his fees on a percentage basis, the fees which is based upon contingent findings. A very important topic. Now, clause number 11. Clause 11, it puts restrictions that a practicing CA cannot engage into any occupation other than that of the chartered accountancy profession. However, Regulation 190A prescribes a lot of activities in which a practicing CA can also engage along with the practice of CA profession. And for many of these activities, general permission is there. However, for remaining activities, prior permission from the council will be required. A CA in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he engages into any business or occupation other than that of the profession of chartered accountant unless permitted. Notes: number 1, a practicing CA may become director of a company provided he or any of his partner is not auditor of that company. However, to become managing director or whole-time director in a company, prior permission from the council of the ICAI is required. Prior permission from the council is required. Regulation 190A of Chartered Accountant Regulation 1988 it prescribes various activities or occupations in which a practicing CA may engage himself generally, that is without specific permission, or specifically after obtaining prior permission from the Council of ICAI. And Regulation 190A details may be covered from the book. Few of the general permissions. Employment with a CA in practice. It is permitted generally. Specifically, employment with others. General permission, editorship of professional journals, other journals, prior permission from the council is required. Private tutorship, general permission. Coaching in an institution, special permission, prior permission will be required. These are the main activities on which the questions are being framed in the exams. However, for the remaining activities, you may refer the main book. Now, a special situation on which a question was asked in the ICAI exam, whether a practicing CA who is a director in a holding company, it is recommended that he should not accept the audit of subsidiary company. The question that was asked in the exam was Mr. A director of H Limited and also a practicing CA. The question was whether Mr. A can accept audit of S Limited, subsidiary of H Limited. Though there is no restriction under clause 11. Clause 11 says that you can accept directorship of a company provided you or your partner is not auditor of that company, not about subsidiary holding. However, the answer as given in the suggested answers was that though there is no legal restriction under the provisions of Chartered Accountant Act 1949, but it is advisable not to accept audit as it might affect his independence. This is about clause number 11. Now, move to clause 12. Whether a practicing CA can permit another person to sign audit reports, certificates, financial statement on his behalf or on behalf of his firm. Clause 12 provides that a practicing CA can allow only a person who is a member of the institute, holding certificate of practice, and his partner. If any person who satisfies these 3 points, the person needs to be a member of the institute, should be partner of the practicing CA, and must hold the certificate of practice. Then you can allow that person to sign on your behalf or on behalf of your firm. Otherwise, it will be a misconduct. A CA in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he allow a person not being a member in practice, a member not being his partner, to sign on his behalf or behalf of his firm any report or financial statement. Though the word "or" is used in this clause, but in general, we consider it as that the person should be a member, holding certificate of practice, and is the partner of concerned practicing CA. If these 3 conditions satisfied, then there will be no misconduct. Otherwise, it will be considered as a professional misconduct. It is clarified by the council that power to sign routine documents on which a professional opinion or authentication is not required. It may be delegated. Examples are signing of checklist, internal control questionnaire, or to attend hearings on tax matters. These are the permitted activities. Clause 12 of Part 1 first schedule to be studied along with Section 26 and Section 145 of the Companies Act. Details of this section already discussed in the regular classes. Now, after this, Part 2 of first schedule starts. Schedule 1, Part 1 deals with the professional misconduct for a practicing member, which covers 12 clauses. Clause number 1, that a practicing CA should not allow his name or firm name to another person. Exceptions are there. Clause 2, a practicing CA should not share his profits, professional work profits, with others except those permitted under Regulation 53A or by Clause 2 itself. Clause 3, do not accept the profits of other persons, profits of professional work of other persons. Clause 4, do not enter into partnership with persons other than those prescribed by Clause 4. Clause 5, securing professional work from persons other than those specified. Clause 6, soliciting the clients or professional work. Clause 7, advertisement of professional attainments or services. Clause 8, prior communication with the predecessor auditor. Clause 9, ensure compliance of Section 139 and 140 of Companies Act 2013. Clause 10, not to charge the fees based upon, not to charge the fees as a percentage of profit or the fees which is contingent upon findings or result of such engagement. Clause 11, not to engage into occupation other than that of the chartered accountancy, except those which are permitted under Regulation 190A. And Clause 12, not to allow anybody to sign reports and financial statement on your behalf or on behalf of your firm name, except a person who is a member of the institute, holding certificate of practice, and is associated with you as a partner, not as an employee, only as a partner. This is all about Schedule 1, Part 1. Now, Schedule 1, Part 2, it deals with professional misconduct for members in service. Two clauses are there. Clause 1, it says that a member in service should not pay or allow directly or indirectly any part of his emoluments, that is salary, with any person. A member in service shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he pay or allow or agree to pay either directly or indirectly to any person any share in the emoluments of employment undertaken by him. Example is given that Mr. X agreed to pay 50% of his salary of first month to ABC consultants as consideration for arranging employments for him. Clause 2. Clause 1, it is in relation to sharing of own emoluments with others. And Clause 2, sharing of others' income, sharing of other fees, and that other person is associated with employer of that CA. A member in service shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he accept or agree to accept any part of fees, profit or gain from a lawyer, CA, broker or agent or customer of whom engaged by company, firm or other person, of such company, firm or other person. In simple language we can say employer. So a member in service shall not accept any part of fees, profit or gain from one lawyer, two chartered accountant, third broker, fourth agent, fifth customer of employer by way of commission or gratification. Example is there. Mr. A, finance manager of ABC Limited, asked for 50% share in fees of advocate as a consideration to refer legal cases of ABC Limited. Mr. A is a chartered accountant associated with the ABC Limited as an employee and his designation was finance manager. Now, he asked for 50% share in fees of advocate. Why the advocate will pay 50% share to him? Because Mr. A will refer the legal cases of ABC consultants, ABC Limited to that advocate. And as a consideration, advocate was required to pay 50% share to Mr. A. No. If any member in service accept or agree to accept from 5 persons, advocate, chartered accountant, agent, broker, customer. If any share is charged from these 5 persons, then that will be considered as a professional misconduct under clause number 2 of part number 2 of first schedule. Now, these are the two clauses which resembles with, this clause resembles with clause number 2 of part 1 of schedule 1. That is in a relation to practicing CA. A practicing CA is also not permitted to share his profits with others. And similarly, clause 3, part 1, schedule 1. A practicing CA is will be guilty of professional misconduct if he accepts profits of professional work of others. However, exceptions was there in clause 3, exceptions was there in clause 2, but in clause 1 and clause 2 of part 2 of first schedule, there is no exception. There is no exception. Now, move to part 3. Part 3 of schedule 1, it deals with professional misconduct for members generally. Professional misconduct for members generally. It says that a member of the institute, whether in practice or not, this word, whether in practice or not, it shows that this part will apply to all members, whether in practice, whether in service or otherwise. In total, 4 clauses are, in total 3 clauses are there. Clause number 1, that if a member who is not a FCA, not a fellow member, but acting as a fellow member, he will be deemed guilty of professional misconduct under clause 1, part number 3 of first schedule. Clause 2, though clause 2, a member, whether in practice or not, shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he does not supply the information called for or does not comply with the requirements asked for by ICAI, its branches, its regional council, its committee, board of discipline, director discipline, appellate authority or quality review board. If a member does not supply the information or does not comply with the requirement asked for by ICAI, its council, its committees, director discipline, board of discipline, disciplinary committee, appellate authority or quality review board. A similar clause with a difference is covered in second schedule part 2. Second schedule part 2 clause number 3. It provides that if a member, whether in practice or not, if he provide false information, providing false information to ICAI, its council, committee, director discipline, board of discipline, its committee, disciplinary directorate, appellate authority or quality review board, it will be considered as a professional misconduct under clause number 3, part number 2 of second schedule. So, if a member is not providing the information to ICAI, he will be guilty of professional misconduct under first schedule. However, providing false information to ICAI or its various authorities, it is a serious offense, and hence the misconduct will fall under clause number 3 of part number 2 of second schedule. If any contravention is related to schedule 1, then fine can only be up to rupees 1 lakh. However, if the contravention is related to second schedule, then fine may extend up to rupees 5 lakh. For contravention of any of the clauses of schedule 1, the name can be removed from the register of member for a maximum period of 3 months. However, for any contravention of any of the clauses of second schedule, the name can be removed for lifetime. The name can be removed for any period including lifetime. So, if the information is not provided for, it will be covered in schedule 1. However, if false information is provided to ICAI, in that case, it will fall under second schedule. Now, clause number 3. Clause number 3, though the language used is a member of the ICAI whether in practice or not, but the language of the clause 3 clearly states the matter only in a relation to a practicing CA. How? Read it. If a member, while inviting professional work from another CA or responding to tender or advertises the professional work as per the permitted means under clause 6 and 7 of part 1 of the first schedule. And clause 6 and 7 of the part 1 of the first schedule deals with the practicing CA. So, though clause 3 of part number 3 of professional misconduct, the word used that these clauses are in a relation to members generally, but practically application of clause number 3 will be in a relation to a practicing CA, because a practicing CA will ask for the professional work from another CA. A practicing CA will respond to tender under clause number 6. A practicing CA will advertise his professional attainments or services under clause number 7. So, if while inviting any professional work as per the permitted means under clause 6 and 7 of the part 1 of the first schedule, any information that is provided to others, and if that information was false, and the concerned CA knows that the information I am providing is false, then he will be guilty of professional misconduct under clause number 3 of part number 3 of first schedule. So, clause 3, it covers, part 3 covers 3 clauses. Clause 1, the person is not a FCA but acting as a FCA. Clause 2, the person does not provide the information asked for or does not comply with the requirements asked for by the ICAI, its committees, regional council and disciplinary bodies. Clause 3, if the person while inviting the professional work as per the permitted means under clause 6 and 7 provides the information knowing it to be false. Now, part number 4. Part number 4 of first schedule that deals with the other misconduct for members generally. First schedule part 4, it covers 2 clauses. Clause number 1, it says that a member of the institute, whether in practice or not, shall be deemed to be guilty of other misconduct, if he is held guilty of any offence by any civil or criminal court which is punishable with imprisonment for a term up to 6 months. If any civil court or criminal court finds a member of the ICAI as guilty of any offence for which the imprisonment up to 6 months is awarded, in that case, the person will be guilty of other misconduct. it is irrelevant that this offense not related with the professional work. Whether or not this offense related with professional work, if the person is treated as guilty and imprisonment is up to 6 months, then he will be considered as guilty of other misconduct under clause 1 part 4 of first schedule. However, if the imprisonment for that offense exceeds 6 months, then it will be considered as a serious offense and it will fall under second schedule part number 3. Second schedule part 3 second schedule part 3, it comprises of only one clause, and that clause says that a member of the institute, whether in practice or not, shall be deemed to be guilty of other misconduct if he is held guilty of any offense by any civil or criminal court which is punishable with imprisonment for a term exceeding 6 years. So, along with schedule 1 part 4 clause 1, you are also required to cover second schedule part 3 only one clause, no other clause is there in the part 3 of second schedule. Now, what about the second clause of part 4 of first schedule? Part 4 first schedule second clause, it says that a member of the institute, whether in practice or not, shall be deemed to be guilty of other misconduct if he brings any disrepute to the profession or the institute as a result of his conduct, whether or not that whether or not that is related with the professional work. Any act or any activity of a person, if it brings any disrepute to the profession or the institute, then that person will be considered as a guilty of other misconduct under clause 2 part 4 of the first schedule. So, schedule 1 part 4 clause 1, if a member, whether in practice or not, is held guilty of any offense by any civil or criminal court for which there exists a punishment in the form of imprisonment up to 6 months, but if imprisonment period is more than 6 months, then it will fall under schedule 2 part number 3 clause 1, the single clause covered by part number 3 of second schedule. Now, the first schedule part number 4 clause number 2, if a member of the institute brings any disrepute to the profession or the institute as a result of his conduct, and that conduct whether or not related with his professional work, then he will be guilty of other misconduct. Certain examples are there, like dishonor of checks due to insufficient funds, using coercive methods to obtain a loan, non-repayment of the loan availed from bank's financial institution or from any other person, retaining the client's records without sufficient cause. That means client has already paid the fees, but the member is not releasing his records, misappropriation of the funds. So these are the various examples due to which a person may be held guilty of other misconduct under the part 4 of first schedule. So this is all about the schedule number 1. So schedule 1, it covers in total how many parts? 4 parts. Part 1, professional misconduct for members in practice, in total 12 clauses. Part number 2 of first schedule, professional misconduct for members in service, 2 clauses. Part number 3, professional misconduct for members generally, 3 clauses. Part number 4, other misconduct for members generally, 2 clauses. With this, we can say that we have completed total 19 clauses of first schedule, of the first schedule. Now, start with the second schedule. Second schedule is divided into three parts. Second schedule is divided in three parts. Part number 1, professional misconduct for members in practice, in total 10 clauses. Part number 2, professional misconduct for members generally, 4 clauses, and part number 3, other misconduct for members generally, 1 clause. This clause we already cover. If a member of the institute, whether in practice, is held guilty of any offence by any civil or criminal court for which the punishment in the form of imprisonment is there exceeding 6 months, then that person will be guilty of other misconduct under clause number 1 of part number 3 of the second schedule. Now, second schedule, part 1, professional misconduct for a practicing member. It covers 10 clauses. We start with the clause number 1. Clause number 1, it deals with the disclosures of client's information. A practicing CA shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he discloses the client's information acquired during the course of professional work to others, except there are 2 exceptions. If the client himself herself allow the practicing CA to disclose that confidential information, that is okay. Or if this disclosure is being required by the provisions of law, in that case also no misconduct will arise, except when permitted by client or required by law. Auditor's duties as to the disclosure of frauds committed by the client. If during the course of professional work, auditor discovered any fraudulent activities that is being committed by the client, what are the auditor's duties? There are various regulatory requirements. First one, SA 240. It requires the auditor to communicate the information relating to the fraud to regulatory and enforcement authorities when required by law. Details will be covered in SA 240. When we will revise SA 240, then details of these provisions will be covered. Now, next one. Section 143, subsection 12. It requires the auditor to report the fraud to the central government in case the amount of the fraud individually is 1 crore rupees or more. Details of this provision will be covered in company audit. Third one, para 3 clause 11 of CARO 2020. It requires the auditor to report the fraud committed by the company or over the company by any officer or employee of the company. In addition, auditor is also required to report whether he has considered whistleblower complaints, if any, received during the year by the company. Details of this point will be covered in CARO 2020 para 3 clause 11. Similar provisions was there in para 3 clause 10 of CARO 2016. No whistleblower mechanism reporting. No whistleblower mechanism reporting was there in the CARO 2016. It is been newly introduced by the CARO 2020. Now, members' duties in relation to taxation fraud. In relation to taxation fraud, what are the members' duties? Various taxation frauds are divided into 2 categories, whether the fraud belongs to past period or the fraud belongs to current period. If the fraud belongs to current period, then you need to advise the client to disclose. If it is disclosed, very good. But if not disclosed, then ICAI Council recommends modify the opinion on the financial statement and disassociate with the income tax return. Modify the report and disassociate with the income tax return. However, if the fraud belongs to past period, when the client was represented by the same member or the client represented by another member. If the client represented by the same member, in that case, first one, advise the client to disclose that fraud. If it is disclosed, very good. If it is not disclosed, then withdraw from current period engagement. But what about the past engagement when the client was also represented by us? In relation to that, these recommendations says that inform income tax authorities not to rely over the report for the past period. However, details as to the fraud not required to be disclosed. Details about the fraud need not be disclosed. Now the second case, the fraud belongs to past period, but client is not represented by us. In that situation, first point, advise the client to disclose. If it is disclosed, very good. If it is not disclosed, then determine the impact of past fraud over the current period. No impact. Okay. If no impact on the current period and I am associated with the client for current period, then no further duty. However, if the past fraud impact the current year financial statements, there arise the significant impact on the current period financial statement, modify the opinion and disassociate with the income tax return. This is about clause 1 of part 1 of second schedule. Remaining part of okay, just do one thing. We discuss clause 2, 3, 4 also. Clause 2, certification without examination. A practicing CA shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he certify any report on examination of financial statement in his name or his firm name, but these financial statement or the underlying records are not being examined either by him or by his partner or by his employee or by another CA That means a person who is a member of the ICAI holding certificate of practice issues the report without examining the financial statement or related records. A CA in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he certifies or submits in his name a report on examination of financial statement when unless examination of such statement and the related records has been made by him, partner, employee or another CA in practice. That is certification without examination. Clause number 3. If a practicing CA permitted use of his name or firm name in connection with an estimate of earnings, in that case he is required to ensure compliance of SAE 3400. However, if the conditions as prescribed in SAE 3400 are not ensured or the examination of these project report or prospective financial information give an impression that this person vouches the accuracy of the forecast, then he will be deemed guilty of professional misconduct, because in relation to prospective financial information, how a person can vouch, because no vouchers are available for the PFIs. Clause 3, a CA in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he permits his name or firm name to be used in connection with an estimate of earning which is contingent upon future transactions in a manner which leads to believe that the practicing CA had vouched the accuracy of the forecast. Because in relation to PFIs, you are making an estimate of earnings. That means it is a prospective information, not historical data. In case of historical data, practicing CA is in case of historical data, a practicing CA can vouch because vouchers are available. However, in a relation to PFI, prospective financial information, due to the absence of any voucher, no one can ensure another person that he vouches for the accuracy of the forecast. So in a relation to this point, the practicing CA is required to ensure compliance of the conditions as stated in SAE 3400. The main points as per SAE 3400 are: preparation of PFI is the responsibility of management. While preparing the PFI, following disclosures must be made: source of information, basis of forecast, and the assumptions made. These three disclosures are to be given, and simultaneously a statement needs to be there that no vouching for the accuracy of the forecast. A practicing CA, if engaged by management for the preparation of PFI, he should ensure appropriate disclosure, and in the accountant report it should be stated that no vouching done for the accuracy of the forecast. Now, clause number 4. Clause number 4, it says that a practicing CA shall be deemed guilty of professional misconduct if he expresses an opinion on the financial statement of an entity in which either he or his partner is having a substantial interest. A practicing CA shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he expresses an opinion on the financial statements of an entity in which he, his partner, or his firm is having substantial interest. And clause 4, it talks only about concerned person or his partner or his firm. Now, what will happen if the relative of this CA is having the substantial interest? In relation to this, Chapter 4 of Council General Guidelines 2008 provides that a practicing CA shall be guilty of professional misconduct if he expresses an opinion on the financial statement of an entity in which the relative is having the substantial interest. And in relation to these guidelines, the relative needs to be considered as per the definition stated in AS 18. And for this purpose, the relative shall comprise of spouse, son, daughter, father, mother, brother, and sister. As per section 141 subsection 3 clause D, a person is disqualified to be appointed as auditor of a company if he, his partner, or his relative is having any interest or holding any security in the company, holding subsidiary, associate, or another subsidiary of holding company. That means here it is mentioned, if in that entity the CA or his partner is having substantial interest, they cannot express opinion. However, company law says that if person or his partner is holding a single share, then also they are disqualified to be appointed as auditor of that company. However, rule number 10 of Companies Audit and Auditor Rule 2014 allow the relative of that person to hold the securities in the company up to face value rupees 1 lakh. As per Rule 10 of Companies Audit and Auditor Rule 2014, A relative may hold securities up to face value rupees 1 lakh in the company. So these are the main points in relation to clause number 4. With this, we have covered the rapid revision of first 5 lectures of regular batch. In regular batch, we take around 14 to 15 hours to cover these 5 lectures, and I think these 15 hours topic takes around 2 hours in rapid revision. So, in next lecture of rapid revision, we will cover the remaining part of professional ethics, and in session number 3, we will complete the professional ethics, and thereafter we start with the rapid revisions of standards on auditing. Okay, this is all for today, and in next session we will finish the professional ethics. Goodbye.